Welcome to MC Noctis, where every shadow has a story. Tonight, never eat from a place setting no one remembers preparing. At 3:07 on a Monday morning, the security system at Hearth and Plenty counted 36 customers inside the restaurant. The thermal cameras counted 61. The additional 25 figures sat between living diners at the midnight buffet. Their bodies registered colder than the tables. Each had an enormous shadow beneath the ribs and a neck so narrow that the head seemed balanced on a cord. No ordinary camera could see them. It could only see what they moved. Forks rose from empty place settings, soup bowls tilted toward invisible mouths, chairs bent beneath weight that did not warm the cushions. Every time one of the cold figures swallowed, a living customer reached for more food. At 3:12, all 36 customers stopped chewing. They turned toward table 24. Only one blue enamel bowl sat there. Steam rose from it, even though the soup should have gone cold hours ago. A spoon, lifted by itself, touched the space above the bowl and came back black with ash. Graham Holt stepped out of the kitchen. The cold figure behind him stood at the same time. It was larger than the others. Its belly hung low and round, but its throat was no wider than 2 fingers. When it opened its mouth, the restaurant lights dimmed inside the opening. Graham could not see it. He could see his customers staring at him. He smiled and asked whether everything tasted all right. 36 mouths answered with one voice. Not yet. Then the buffet scales began to ring. Every serving tray was emptying before the cameras, but the recorded weight of the food did not change. The missing portions were appearing somewhere else. In the sealed loading bay behind the kitchen, the trash compactor groaned beneath 900 pounds of fresh, untouched food. Something inside the compactor knocked 3 times. Then it asked Graham to open the door. It used the voice of Silas Bell, the chef whose recipe had made Graham rich. Silas had been dead for 11 years. 4 hours earlier, a prep cook had found the blue bowl behind a newly opened wall. Written beneath it were 6 words. The first serving is not yours. Hearth and Plenty occupied a converted produce warehouse in Cicero, west of Chicago. Its dining room seated 200 beneath exposed steel beams, artificial fireplaces, and framed photographs of farms that had never supplied the restaurant. Graham Holt had built the place to look generous. That was not the same as being generous. At 47, Graham was celebrated for turning cheap ingredients into food people described as comforting. His signature dish was ember broth, a dark onion and barley soup served from an old copper kettle at the center of the buffet. Magazine profiles claimed he had developed it during years of hunger and failure. The truth belonged to a cook named Silas Bell. Graham never used that name in interviews. The restaurant had closed every night at 11 until the new expansion. Graham wanted Hearth and Plenty to become the first premium buffet in the county to operate 24 hours a day. The overnight launch was scheduled for the 11th anniversary of the restaurant's opening. Nina Reyes thought the date was a mistake. She managed the night shift with the calm of someone who had spent 6 years dispatching ambulances before deciding that restaurants were less traumatic. At 34, she knew that any business claiming to run without sleep was usually surviving by hiding exhaustion where customers could not see it. The first problem appeared during the final inspection. Contractors removed a panel behind the old walk-in freezer and uncovered a narrow brick alcove. It contained no pipes, wiring, or insulation, only a wooden shelf and a blue enamel bowl. The bowl was clean. The alcove was not. Grease darkened the bricks around it in the shape of many reaching hands. Owen Lark, the overnight prep cook, found 6 words scratched beneath the shelf. The first serving is not yours. Old kitchen superstition, Graham said. He took the bowl before Nina could photograph it. For half a second, his confident expression disappeared. He looked toward the loading bay door. Throw it out. Owen carried it to the trash, but the enamel had no chips, and the deep blue color matched the restaurant's new plates. He washed it and left it beside the copper soup kettle. At 11:30, the first overnight customers arrived. By midnight, every station was crowded. Carved meat steamed beneath heat lamps. Pies shone behind glass. The copper kettle released the scent that had made Graham famous. Onions browned almost to bitterness, black pepper, smoke, and something sweet no employee could identify. Nina checked the dining room cameras. Table 24 appeared empty. On the floor plan, its chair sensors showed 5 occupied seats. She assumed the system needed calibration. Owen filled the blue bowl with ember broth and placed it at the empty table so the camera technician could test the sensor. Before he walked away, the surface of the soup bent inward. Something had taken a sip. Owen called Nina over. By the time she reached table 24, the broth was still. Air bubble, Graham said when they told him. He had begun circulating through the dining room, accepting compliments and ensuring that every camera captured him near the food. He did not look at the blue bowl. Nina reset the chair sensors. 5 green lights became 0. Then one chair moved backward. Its wooden legs scraped the floor in full view of 3 customers. None reacted. A man at the next table shifted his coat from an empty chair and apologized to the space beside him. Sorry, didn't see you there. He continued eating. The space answered by breathing onto his water glass. Condensation spread across the outside in the shape of a small mouth. At 12:38, the inventory system reported that guests had taken 94 pounds of food. Nina checked the buffet scales and found a discrepancy. The trays had visibly lowered, but their combined weight had decreased by only 3 pounds. She opened the trash room camera. Fresh food covered the floor around the compactor. Slices of roast, rolls, fruit, cake, all untouched and arranged in small piles. Each pile corresponded to an empty place setting in the dining room. The restaurant was not losing food. It was moving it somewhere the guests could not see. Nina locked the trash room and returned to table 24. The blue bowl was empty. Owen stood over it with the spoon in his hand. Did you eat that? He stared at the grey coating on his tongue. I wanted to know why it smelled burned. It didn't. Owen swallowed twice. His face tightened. It does now. He walked to the buffet and filled a plate. He ate standing beside the carving station, barely chewing. Then he filled another. Within 10 minutes, he had consumed enough food for 4 people. His stomach remained flat. His shadow did not. Under the heat lamps, it swelled across the tile, round and distended beneath the ribs. The shadow's neck narrowed, while Owen's body remained unchanged. Nina grabbed his wrist before he could lift a 3rd plate. His skin was cold. I can't feel it, he said. Feel what? The food arriving. He looked over Nina's shoulder toward the empty chair. Someone else is swallowing before it reaches me. The spoon in the blue bowl rose again. This time, Nina saw the fingers holding it. They were translucent, grey, and jointed too many times. The arm vanished at the shoulder into a shape that only existed where steam touched it. A huge belly, a thread-like throat, a mouth smaller than a coin. The thing pushed the spoon between its lips. The broth ignited. The flame lasted less than a second. The spirit recoiled, but it made no sound. Its throat expanded and contracted around food that could not pass. Black ash fell into the bowl. Then the steam thinned, and the figure disappeared. Nina pulled Owen into the security office. She opened the thermal feed because it separated living bodies from reflected heat, warming trays and kitchen equipment. At first, the dining room looked ordinary. 36 bright human shapes moving among red tables and orange buffet stations. Then the software adjusted its temperature range. 25 cold figures appeared. They occupied the spaces between customers. Some sat on chairs, others crouched beneath tables with their faces tilted upward. Each had a swollen abdomen and a throat reduced to a dark line. Their heads moved whenever a living diner raised a fork. One figure leaned over an elderly man's shoulder and opened its tiny mouth. The man took a bite of pie. The spirit inhaled through him. His thermal image cooled from the lips downward. He immediately reached for another slice. Nina switched to the ordinary camera. Nothing stood behind him, yet the second slice crumbled into ash inside his mouth. He swallowed it, smiled weakly, and reached for a third. Every cold figure was attached to someone now, except the largest one. It followed Graham. Wherever he walked, it remained half a step behind, bent by the weight of its belly. Its neck stretched toward the back of his head like a narrow funnel. Graham shook hands, posed for photographs, and never felt the thing's lips brushing his hair. Mina called emergency services. Her phone connected to the restaurant's own reservation line. A recording thanked her for calling half and plenty and asked how many guests were in her party. 61, a voice whispered beside the receiver. Owen lunged for a box of employee snacks. Nina blocked him. He struck the desk hard enough to split one knuckle, then stared at his hand as if it belonged to someone else. "I'm sorry," he said. "I thought you were keeping food from me." In the dining room, a woman screamed. Her plate had turned gray. She spat out a mouthful of ash, but the moment it hit the table, she scooped it back with both hands. The diners nearest her stood up. Their chairs toppled. The cold figures rose with them. For the first time, their outlines became visible without the thermal feed. Dozens of wet, grey bodies revealed by steam, mouths opening and closing in the air above the food. Graham entered the security office and saw the screen. Nina expected fear. Instead, he reached past her and shut off the recording system. "No one leaves until we understand what this looks like from outside," he said. Then, he lowered the restaurant's steel security shutters. The shutters struck the floor with a sequence of metallic crashes. Panic moved through the dining room faster than any explanation could have. Customers abandoned their tables and crowded the entrance. The locked doors showed the parking lot beyond, empty and ordinary beneath white lamps. When people beat against the glass, the cold figures gathered behind them and watched. Graham used the public address system. He blamed an electrical fault. He asked everyone to remain calm. He promised the doors would reopen in several minutes. Then he told Nina to confiscate any phone recording the buffet. She refused. "People are eating ash." People are frightened. Frightened people misremember. Across the room, two men fought over a tray of dinner rolls. Neither had wanted bread 5 minutes earlier. Now each held the tray against his chest, while the cold shapes behind them reached through their shoulders. The buffet remained full. That made the fear worse. Every pan refilled when no one watched. Meat reappeared beneath carving knives. Pies became whole after slices were removed. The more the guests ate, the more food accumulated in the sealed trash room. The hunger consumed sensation, not substance. Owen understood it first. He sat on the security office floor with both arms wrapped around his stomach. It doesn't want the meal. It wants the part that tells me I had one. Nina brought him a roll. Before she could hand it over, a cold figure appeared beside him. Its narrow mouth trembled. The bread blackened at the edges. Nina broke the roll in half. She gave one piece to Owen and placed the other in her own mouth. The ghost jerked backward. For 3 seconds, Owen's eyes cleared. I felt that. The piece he swallowed tasted like bread. Nina looked across the dining room. The guests who hoarded food had the darkest shapes attached to them. A group of strangers sharing water near the windows had none. She turned to Graham. They can't take what's willingly divided. Graham was staring at the thermal screen he claimed to have shut off. The largest figure remained behind him. You know what these things are, Nina said. His silence answered. 11 years earlier, before Hearth and Plenty, Graham and Silas Bell had cooked together in a 20-seat diner built into the front of the same warehouse. Silas made a cheap broth after closing and left the first bowl outside the loading door. He said it belonged to anyone who had died hungry and had no table waiting for them. Graham called it wasted inventory. Later, he called the recipe his own. During the winter, they separated. Silas returned on the coldest night of the year. He had not eaten in 4 days. He knocked on the loading door while Graham hosted investors inside. Graham said he never heard him. The largest cold figure bent its thread-like neck around Graham's shoulder. From the loading bay came 3 slow knocks. Silas Bell's voice asked to be let in. Nina did not open the loading door. The voice outside knocked again. You left my bowl empty, Graham. The words came through 3 different places at once. The steel door, the ventilation duct, and Owen's mouth. Owen clamped both hands over his lips. His cheeks stretched outward, as if someone was speaking from the wrong side of his teeth. Graham backed away. Silas is dead. That has never stopped you from serving his food. The lights above the buffet went out, 1 row at a time. In the darkness, spoons struck porcelain throughout the dining room. 36 diners began eating faster. Nina remembered the brick alcove. Its shelf had been built lower than the freezer floor, as if the bowl had not been placed inside a wall, but above something buried. She took a flashlight and forced Graham to show her the old kitchen plans. No alcove appeared on them. A square, beneath the walk-in, was marked only with the original warehouse symbol for a produce drain. They removed the freezer's rubber floor mat. Under it waited an iron hatch. The handle was warm. Below the hatch, narrow steps descended into a chamber lined with shelves. Hundreds of restaurant receipts had been nailed to the walls. Every receipt showed an uneaten first serving. On the back of each, Silas had written a date and a name. Some names belonged to people whose photographs hung in the dining room as founding guests. All of them had died before Hearth and Plenty opened. At the center of the chamber stood a ledger wrapped in waxed cloth. The first pages contained Silas's recipe and one warning. The first bowl is a threshold. Feed the forgotten before you feed yourself, and they will pass without entering. Nina turned farther. Silas's handwriting changed. The careful letters leaned forward and crowded together. He had discovered that hungry spirits left a trace of their appetite in anything placed before them. Add 1 spoonful of the first bowl to the public kettle, and customers would order more. Add 2, and they would return the next day. Add 3, and they would dream of the taste. Silas had not merely protected his diner from the dead.
He had learned to make the living hungry for them. Graham had stolen more than a recipe. He had stolen an unfinished experiment. From above came the sound of every plate in the restaurant breaking at once.
When Nina climbed back into the kitchen, the dining room had changed. No one was fighting anymore. The customers sat in perfect silence, hands folded beside empty plates. Their mouths worked slowly, chewing meals that were no longer there. Behind each person, a cold figure copied the motion. Only the group by the windows still looked human. They had divided a bottle of water among 7 paper cups. That small act had kept the spirits from attaching to them. Nina placed the ledger on the counter and read the oldest rule aloud. Food offered freely could cross the threshold. Food guarded, stolen, or used to purchase obedience became ash. The dead could not be filled by quantity because their hunger was not inside their bellies. It was the last human refusal they had carried into death. Silas had collected their names and the meals they remembered sharing. A peach cut between sisters, cornbread passed around a mining camp, soup thinned with water until 12 people could taste it. At the bottom of one page, he had described a closing rite. Set a place for every uninvited guest. Ask the living to surrender what they would have kept. Serve the first ball last. When the dead remember receiving without taking, open the eastern door and let them leave before dawn. "We can do that," Nina said. Graham stared at the final instruction. "And if one refuses?" The ledger answered in red ink. "The hungriest will need a host." Graham shut the book. He ordered Owen to bring every folding table from storage. Nina asked the guests by the windows to help. One by one, they persuaded the others to surrender something untouched. A roll hidden in a pocket, a sealed cup of yogurt, the last clean bottle of water. The moment each item was shared, color returned to it. They built one long table from the buffet to the loading door. Nina placed 25 settings along it. The cold figures gathered behind the chairs. Owen carried the blue bowl from table 24. His arms shook so badly that broth spilled over the rim. Wherever a drop touched the floor, a black handprint appeared and crawled toward his shoe. Nina caught the bowl. For the first time since tasting it, Owen stopped begging for food. He was staring through the glass doors of the restaurant. Outside, beyond the locked shutters, hundreds of cold shapes stood in the parking lot. The bowl had not summoned 25 spirits. It had opened a table for every hungry thing close enough to smell it. At 4:41, the first hand pushed beneath the steel shutter. Its fingers were thin enough to slide through the gap, but the wrist swelled when it entered, as though the creature outside were trying to pour an enormous body through a narrow opening. Nina had less than an hour before dawn. She set the blue bowl beside the copper kettle, saving it for the final place. She began serving. Each living person stood beside one empty chair and divided a portion with a guest they could not see. Steam outlined faces over the plates. Some appeared old. Some were barely formed. One wore the scorched outline of a factory uniform. Another still carried frost in its hair. When the first man said, "This is yours," the spirit beside him tried to swallow. The food did not burn. Its tiny throat widened for a single breath. The enormous belly collapsed. The figure became almost human, then turned toward the east windows and vanished. Around the table, others followed. For several minutes, the rite worked. The room warmed. Customers wept as the feeling of fullness returned. Owen laughed once, quietly, after half a spoonful of broth reached his stomach. Then the largest spirit sat at the final place. The chair broke beneath nothing visible. Silas Bell appeared in the steam above it. He looked less like a corpse than a man shaped from the memory of starvation. His cook's coat hung from pointed shoulders. His eyes were clear, almost gentle. "First ball," he said. Nina lifted the blue bowl. It was empty. Across the kitchen, Graham stood beside the copper kettle with a ladle against his lips. He had drunk the final serving. For 11 years, Graham had followed the only part of Silas's notes he understood. He stirred drops from each batch's first serving back into the kettle. Not enough to open the door, only enough to make desire outlive satisfaction. He had sealed the blue bowl inside the wall after early customers began asking who sat at table 24. Tonight, with the restaurant collapsing around him, he had finally understood what Silas's last pages promised. A host did not merely contain the hungriest spirit. It could command the others by deciding who would eat. "I built this place," Graham said. "I can feed them. I can make this work." Silas smiled. His mouth was no larger than a coin. "That is what I said." The copper kettle rang like a struck bell. Every spirit that had vanished returned at once. The shared food blackened. The long table split down the center. Cold bodies climbed through the people they had released, entering mouths, nostrils, and shadows. Outside, the steel shutters bowed inward beneath hundreds of hands. Graham dropped the ladle. His stomach began to swell. Graham's chef jacket tightened around a body that changed without gaining weight. His abdomen pushed forward, round and low. His shoulders narrowed. Beneath his chin, the skin drew inward until his throat looked pinched by invisible wire. He tried to scream. Only the sound of cutlery came out. The spirits stopped attacking the diners and turned toward him. For one hopeful second, Graham believed they were obeying. Then they opened their mouths. Hunger passed into him from every direction. He fell to his knees and crawled toward the buffet, cramming cold meat into his mouth. Each bite turned to ash. He swallowed faster, scratching his own lips bloody without appearing to feel it. Silas watched with pity. "You cannot own what has no end," he said. Nina saw the truth before Graham did. The closing rite had not failed because Silas wanted revenge. It had failed because Graham had kept one portion for power. As long as Hearth and Plenty had an owner, every plate inside could still be withheld. She ran to the manager's station and unlocked the loading bay controls. Graham dragged himself after her. His voice had become a dry whisper squeezed through the narrowing tunnel of his throat. "If you open that door, they'll get out." "They were never here for the building." Nina pressed the switch. The loading door rose. Cold night air entered with hundreds of pale shapes. They did not rush the living. They looked toward the buffet. Nina took the microphone. "Nothing in this restaurant belongs to Hearth and Plenty anymore," she said. "Take it. Give it away. Do not keep a portion for yourself." The survivors moved. They carried trays, boxes, bread, fruit, and sealed containers into the parking lot. Each person handed food to someone else before taking any. The more they gave away, the dimmer the spirits became. Owen lifted the copper kettle with bare hands. Graham grabbed its handle. "That is mine." The words silenced the entire restaurant. Every cold head turned. The kettle split between them. Ember broth poured over the floor, but instead of spreading, it ran backward toward the iron hatch beneath the freezer. Silas followed it.
so did Graham. He clawed at the tile, begging Nina to save him, promising money, the restaurant, anything she wanted. For one moment, she reached for his wrist. Then Graham's hand closed around hers and tried to pull her down first. Owen struck his arm away. The kitchen floor opened along the old produce drain. Silas descended without resistance. Graham fought until the darkness took his voice. His final sound came from the copper kettle, 3 soft knocks from somewhere deep inside the metal. The floor sealed. At 5:28, the steel shutters lifted by themselves. Morning entered a restaurant filled with ash.
7 people were missing when the police arrived. Their coats remained on chairs. Their cars remained in the parking lot. Security footage showed them carrying food toward the loading bay, but never showed them crossing the door. Hearth and Plenty closed permanently. The official report blamed contaminated food, crowd panic, and an electrical fire that investigators could not locate. The iron hatch beneath the freezer was gone. In its place lay unbroken concrete poured when the warehouse was built. No record of Silas Bell could be found. Nina kept the ledger. Most of its pages turned blank after sunrise. Only the names of the 7 missing customers remained, written in wet black ink. Beneath them appeared a new instruction. Do not mistake escape for fullness. Owen survived, but the feeling of satisfaction never completely returned. He could eat. He could taste. His body could be nourished. Yet no signal told him when enough had become enough. So Nina taught him to divide every meal before the first bite. Half a sandwich went to a co-worker. The first cup of coffee went to a stranger. At night, he left a piece of bread outside his apartment door. The hunger became quiet. It never disappeared. Nina took a job managing a community kitchen on Chicago's West Side. She refused to display her name on the office door. She never used recipes she could not credit. Before each service, she filled a blue enamel bowl and placed it on a shelf beside the back entrance. The first serving was never touched while anyone watched. It was always empty by morning. 11 months after the restaurant closed, a demolition crew entered Hearth and Plenty. One worker found the old thermal recorder sealed inside the wall. The drive contained a final minute of footage, stamped 3:07 a.m., though the building had no electricity. 25 cold figures sat at the long table. Silas stood at one end. At the other stood something with Graham's face, a swollen shadow and a throat no wider than a finger. Between them sat the 7 missing customers. They were not eating, they were waiting, while 2 blue bowls filled themselves. Nina watched the recording once. That evening, she placed a second empty bowl beside the first at the community kitchen. At 3:07 the next morning, the rear camera showed Owen arriving with a loaf of bread. He divided it carefully between the bowls and walked away without tasting it. The first bowl emptied. The second remained full. Then a hand appeared from inside Owen's shadow. It reached back toward the food. And somewhere beyond the camera's frame, a man with Graham's voice whispered that one bowl had never been enough. Hunger is honest when it asks for food. The more dangerous hunger is the one that asks for ownership, applause, obedience, or one portion more after everyone else has gone without. Graham believed he could turn that hunger into a business. Silas believed he could study it without becoming part of it. Both men discovered the same truth too late. An emptiness fed for profit does not become loyal. It only learns who keeps the key. Perhaps the second bowl remained full because the dead no longer wanted bread. Perhaps they had learned to wait for the hand that could not resist taking it back. So, if you ever enter an all-night restaurant and notice one place setting no employee remembers preparing, leave it alone. And if the first serving arrives before you order, do not ask who it belongs to. You may hear the answer from inside your own stomach. Thank you for spending this night with MC Noctis. If this story stayed with you, subscribe, leave a comment, and tell me what frightened you most. The spirits at the tables, the meal that could never satisfy, or the moment Graham believed the hunger would obey him. Until we meet beneath the next shadow, remember, some doors are locked to keep monsters out, and some bowls are left full to keep them from coming in.